In the fading embers of the Second World War, much of what the world came to believe was filtered, rewritten, and carefully chosen for public consumption. Yet in the sealed chambers of military archives, behind the locked drawers of intelligence ministries, and inside the coded ledgers of naval command, darker truths remained buried. Pages marked classified carried stories too costly to release, their revelations capable of shaking morale or fracturing fragile alliances. They were silenced not because they were myths, but because they were real, scattered across the ruined cities, icy seas, and secret negotiation rooms of wartime Europe. Fragments of these forbidden accounts still whisper. They are found in half-burnt memoranda, intercepted enemy traffic, and testimonies given in the dim light of tribunal courts. And when pieced together, they form a chilling mosaic of betrayal, secrecy, and decisions that condemned thousands to vanish without trace. This is not the history carved into monuments or printed in schoolbooks. This is the forbidden history, the kind of story that comes not from parades and treaties, but from the margins of war where truth was deemed too dangerous to see daylight. Tonight, 4 classified files are pried open, 4 accounts locked away for decades, each stitched together from fragments hidden in Soviet dossiers, Gestapo files, and Allied reports redacted until only shadows remained. The voices you will hear are echoes of men and women who lived, suffered, and disappeared. They speak from the darkness of vaults, from the sea, and from the forests where truth was bartered like contraband, and their words remain the closest thing to testimony from the abyss of war. Chapter 1: The Forgotten Convoy of Death. The Arctic Ocean, in the summer of 1942, was a place of iron skies and black seas, where cold could freeze skin within minutes and fog rolled in like a wall of silence. It was through this desolate corridor that Convoy PQ-17 was ordered to sail, carrying nearly 400,000 tons of critical war material from Britain and the United States to the Soviet Union. Tanks, trucks, Hurricanes, and P-39 aircraft were secured in the holds of 34 merchant ships, escorted by destroyers and covered from afar by heavy cruisers. To Moscow, this convoy represented lifeblood. To Berlin, it was a prize that could turn the tide in the north. And to London, it was a dangerous gamble on which both reputation and trust with Stalin depended. On July 4, 1942, a signal was issued that would doom the convoy and leave behind one of the darkest marks in the Allied war effort. The Admiralty, operating from Room 39 in Whitehall, had intercepted reports of the German battleship Tirpitz leaving her anchorage in Altenfjord. Though no confirmed visual sighting was made, British intelligence feared the mighty warship and her escorts would engage the convoy head-on. At 21:11 hours, First Sea Lord Admiral Sir Dudley Pound issued the now infamous order, "Convoy is to scatter." The directive was sent through secure Admiralty code channels and relayed to the merchant captains braving Arctic waters. What followed was chaos. Without the protective screen of destroyers and cruisers, unarmed freighters drifted alone into the vast sea, making them perfect targets for the wolf packs and Luftwaffe bombers already hunting in the shadows. It was a decision historians would later describe as both an error of judgment and an act of betrayal. The fog lifted the next morning, revealing broken formations of ships stretched across hundreds of miles of open sea. U-88 and U-457 began the slaughter, their torpedoes tearing into the hulls of the Liberty ships like knives through glass. Survivors later recalled the violent shock of explosions under their feet, followed by fire crawling across the decks and the sickening sound of men screaming into frozen air. Heinkel bombers flew low, dropping armor-piercing bombs that ripped through steel, setting tanks and munitions ablaze. The convoy, once a disciplined line of endurance, was now scattered prey. In just days, 24 of the 34 merchantmen had been sunk, oil slicks spread across the surface, glistening in the dim Arctic light. Bodies, lashed to rafts or left drifting, were consumed by the sea. Few rescue efforts could be mounted in those conditions, and many who survived the explosions perished within hours from hypothermia. In Soviet archives preserved in Arkhangelsk, radio transmissions tell of increasing desperation. Messages written in hasty code requested clarification, demanded confirmation, and begged for escort reinforcements that never came. Stalin himself reportedly accused Churchill of sabotage, interpreting the scattering order as a deliberate attempt to deny Soviet forces the supplies they needed for their survival against the Wehrmacht. The truth was more complicated, yet equally damning. Admiralty staff had relied on faulty intelligence, misled by fragmented Enigma decrypts and the phantom movements of Tirpitz. The German battleship never engaged the convoy. She had remained at anchor, her very existence a weapon of fear more powerful than her guns. Among the most chilling testimonies came from sailors aboard the American merchant ship SS William Hooper. They described hours of silence, punctuated by sudden attacks that left the ocean littered with debris. One survivor recalled clinging to wreckage, watching a burning tanker sink bow first into the sea, the flames reflecting in his frozen eyes. Rescue trawlers arrived too late. In many cases, ships sank in less than 5 minutes, giving their crews no chance to escape. Records from the Kriegsmarine, later seized by Allied investigators, show German captains reporting the sinking of stragglers without escort, documenting the destruction with clinical precision. By July 10th, the Arctic was strewn with the wreckage of PQ-17. Only 11 of the original 34 merchant ships reached Soviet ports, delivering a fraction of the promised supplies. The others lay at the bottom of the sea, along with nearly 150 aircraft, hundreds of tanks, and enough ammunition to supply a Soviet army for months. The survivors were marked not only by frostbite and wounds, but by the knowledge that they had been abandoned on the strength of a single misinterpreted order. Their accounts were quietly filed away, redacted in naval summaries, and for decades remained absent from official histories. When the records were finally opened after the war, the scandal of PQ-17 was minimized, its losses described as a tragic but unavoidable consequence of war. But within the corridors of the Admiralty, whispers told another story. The order to scatter had not been a mere blunder. It was an act of strategic sacrifice. Protecting the heavy units of the Royal Navy was deemed more vital than protecting merchant lives and cargo. Britain could not afford to risk Tirpitz's guns against her cruisers, even at the cost of leaving an entire convoy to its fate. Thus, the decision was made in the quiet of an office, far from the icy waters where men froze and ships burned. That truth was too harsh to share with the public, too corrosive to morale, and too damning to be admitted to Moscow. The convoy's memory lingered like a scar. Veterans spoke of the night the Admiralty abandoned us, and Soviet commanders never forgave the betrayal. In naval academies, PQ-17 became a case study in how fear and intelligence failure could destroy entire operations. And in the private files of intelligence historians, it was whispered of as the forgotten convoy of death. The convoy that died not at the hands of the enemy, but under the weight of a single command. Even today, the wrecks remain scattered across the seabed of the Barents Sea, silent tombs rusting in the cold currents, bearing witness to a tragedy written in ice and iron. They lie beyond reach, but their story, pieced together from declassified dispatches and survivor testimonies, remains a stark reminder of what happens when secrecy, fear, and the machinery of war collide with human lives. In those frozen waters, the silence of PQ-17 still echoes. Chapter 2: Operation Vampyr in Warsaw Ruins. The Warsaw Uprising of 1944 remains etched in memory as an act of defiance and sacrifice. Yet hidden beneath the ruins of the city lies a chapter shrouded in secrecy and horror. Among the mountains of rubble and the scorched ruins of Śródmieście, Gestapo records reference an obscure and chilling project codenamed Operation Vampyr. File No. 47V, recovered from Gestapo headquarters and later seized by Soviet counterintelligence, describes a program conducted in makeshift laboratories deep beneath destroyed tenements, where the Derlewanger Brigade and SS medical detachments carried out grotesque experiments with blood and plasma. The official Nazi medical records never acknowledged it, yet fragments of testimony and intercepted German transmissions speak of a clandestine operation that blurred the line between medical necessity and calculated exploitation. In the bowels of Warsaw, prisoners were reduced not to slave laborers, but to living reservoirs, drained and discarded in the darkness, while the city burned above. The operation began in August 1944, during the height of the uprising. German forces, stretched thin and under constant attack from Home Army fighters, faced critical shortages in medical supplies. Field hospitals, particularly those supporting the Waffen-SS and Derlewanger units, were desperate for plasma to treat the mounting casualties. In an intercepted transmission decoded by Soviet NKVD radio operators, SS Sturmbannführer Ernst Lurch requested immediate medical resupply for his regiment. The response, preserved in fragmentary Gestapo logs, was chilling. Proceed with Vampyr. The codename signaled the initiation of forced extraction procedures from prisoners captured during sweeps of the ghetto ruins, and among the civilian population, hundreds were dragged into cellars that had once served as bomb shelters, where steel tables, pumps, and crude transfusion equipment were set up under dim lantern light. Witnesses later described the constant smell of antiseptic mixed with smoke and blood, a metallic stench that clung to the air. Testimonies from surviving prisoners, gathered by Soviet tribunals in 1946, offer harrowing glimpses into the operation. One woman recounted how her husband was taken into a cellar and never returned. Days later, she saw his lifeless body discarded in a sewer tunnel, his arms punctured with repeated needle marks. Another survivor, a Polish doctor forced to assist under SS supervision, spoke of barrels filled with human blood, transported at night by covered trucks to field hospitals outside the city. He described standing guard over glass bottles of crimson liquid, labeled only with codes and dates, destined for wounded officers who would never know their transfusion came from condemned civilians. The Dirlewanger Brigade, infamous for atrocities, provided guards who laughed as they herded victims into underground chambers, their boots echoing on the stone steps. In the silence that followed, only the hiss of pumps and the faint cries of those fading into unconsciousness broke the dark. Soviet archives from Smersh intelligence units confirm the capture of documents detailing experimental trials with plasma substitutes. German medical officers, under pressure to find alternatives, injected prisoners with untested solutions derived from animal proteins and chemical compounds. Survivors described waves of convulsions, skin eruptions, and internal bleeding before death followed. These experiments were not recorded in official German medical journals, but their notes, coded and filed under Vampyr Med 44, were intercepted during the retreat of German forces in January 1945. Stalin ordered the documents sealed, not to protect German perpetrators, but to ensure Soviet exploitation of the data for its own military medicine programs. In the Cold War years, Western investigators searching for Nazi war crimes rarely gained access to these files, leaving Operation Vampyr buried in obscurity. The Warsaw landscape itself concealed the operation. Beneath the collapsed tenements of Śródmieście and Wola, labyrinths of sewers and cellars provided the perfect cover. Flames above illuminated the night sky, masking the clandestine lights below. German engineers reinforced certain tunnels, converting them into hidden clinics where medical officers could work uninterrupted. Prisoners were transported blindfolded, often chained, stumbling through corridors filled with dripping water and choking smoke. Those who resisted were shot on the spot, their bodies left as warnings in side tunnels. Witnesses claimed that entire sewer sections became mass graves, filled with corpses showing puncture wounds and drained veins. After the war, Polish resistance fighters returning to the ruins reported discovering stacks of skeletal remains sealed behind collapsed walls, their hollow bones a mute testament to what had occurred. Operation Vampyr was not only about sustaining German forces, it also represented a cold experiment in the industrialization of human exploitation. Medical officers treated blood as a resource, no different from oil or coal, something to be harvested and consumed. Prisoners were tagged, catalogued, and measured for output capacity, with their fates decided by calculations scribbled in ledgers. Some Soviet investigators later suggested that the program was linked to broader SS research into mass transfusion logistics, data that could be used in future conflicts. If true, Warsaw served not merely as a battlefield but as a living laboratory, its suffering population reduced to experimental fodder. After the war, fragments of the truth emerged during the Nuremberg doctors' trial, though direct reference to Operation Vampyr was suppressed. When Polish prosecutors attempted to introduce survivor testimonies, Western judges questioned the credibility of the evidence, citing a lack of physical documentation. The Gestapo files that could have confirmed the operation remained locked in Soviet archives, inaccessible to international investigators. As a result, Vampyr faded into obscurity, overshadowed by the larger horrors of Auschwitz and medical crimes committed by Mengele. Yet in Poland, whispers endured. Families of the disappeared spoke of relatives taken during the uprising, of cellars from which no one returned, and of trucks moving at night carrying cargo that smelled of iron and decay. Even today, historians argue over the existence of Operation Vampyr. Skeptics dismiss it as Soviet propaganda, while others point to the consistency of survivor testimonies and the peculiar gaps in Gestapo medical files. The location of certain tunnels remains sealed, their entrances bricked up after the war, perhaps to conceal evidence too disturbing to expose. Polish urban explorers who entered collapsed cellars in the 1960s reported finding rusted equipment resembling transfusion pumps, their glass tubes still stained dark. Whether these were remnants of Vampyr or simply abandoned field hospitals remains uncertain. But the voices of survivors, the fragments of Gestapo records, and the cold silence of Soviet archives suggest something far more sinister. The story of Operation Vampyr remains one of the most unsettling footnotes of the war, a hidden chapter in which medicine was weaponized and human bodies became resources to be drained. The ruins of Warsaw hold many secrets, but among them, none is darker than the image of prisoners marched into underground chambers, stripped of their blood, and discarded in the shadows while the city above screamed with fire and rebellion. It is a story that was meant to be forgotten, buried with the rubble, sealed in classified files, and silenced by politics. Yet it lingers, waiting to be unearthed, a haunting reminder that in war, even the most sacred boundaries of humanity can be shattered in the name of survival and power. Chapter 3: The Ghost Battalion of Stalingrad. In the bitter winter of 1943, when the frozen ruins of Stalingrad became the graveyard of Hitler's eastern ambitions, countless units were annihilated in the chaos of encirclement. But one regiment, the 91st Rifle Regiment of the Red Army, did not simply fall in combat. It vanished. Soviet General Staff files, declassified in the 1990s, document the regiment's existence, its orders, and its final movements. Yet there are no burial reports, no casualty lists, and no reliable German records confirming its destruction. Instead, there is a void, a regiment of over 2,000 men, swallowed not by artillery or encirclement, but by the machinery of misinformation and shadows. It became known among veterans as the Ghost Battalion, a unit remembered not for its battles, but for its disappearance. The regiment had been positioned near the southern sector of Stalingrad, in the shadow of the massive grain elevator that had already become a symbol of the city's defiance. According to Soviet dispatches dated January 23, 1943, the 91st was ordered to advance into the industrial district near the Barricadi factory. Their movements were coordinated through radio channels that, unbeknownst to Soviet command, were being compromised by German Abwehr signals intelligence. The Germans had perfected a form of Funkspiel, or radio play, intercepting transmissions and sending counterfeit orders using captured Soviet codes. Historians believe that one such phantom order lured the regiment away from its intended axis, drawing it deeper into the ruins where Paulus's 6th Army still held desperate pockets of resistance. For days, Soviet records show the regiment was unaccounted for. Reports from the 64th Army indicate attempts to re-establish contact, but no replies came. Patrols sent into the area found only abandoned foxholes and burnt equipment. On January 27th, an NKVD memorandum described the matter as potential sabotage of communications, further investigation required. Yet no investigation could uncover the truth. The only evidence that the regiment had moved at all came from captured German radio traffic, referencing a Soviet battalion delivered for interrogation, source unusable, all executed. The message, filed under Wehrmacht Group South archives, is vague, offering no unit designation, but the timing coincides precisely with the disappearance of the 91st. When Soviet forces later reclaimed the district in February, they found haunting signs. Helmets stacked against factory walls, frozen rifles leaning against barricades, and scattered personal items abandoned as if in haste. In one warehouse, charred remains of campfires revealed attempts at survival. But no bodies, no mass graves, no definitive signs of annihilation were ever found. It was as if the regiment had been lifted from the battlefield, erased from both Soviet and German records. For the families of the missing, official letters would simply state, "unrecoverable." Their sons and fathers became names on lists, with no burial site to mourn, no trace to reclaim. The mystery deepened when NKVD reports uncovered evidence that German intelligence had been experimenting with disinformation operations aimed at destabilizing Soviet morale. By infiltrating radio networks, they could redirect entire units into ambushes, or into areas where starvation and cold would finish what bullets could not. Some historians argue that the 91st Rifle Regiment was deliberately misled into the industrial maze, cut off, and annihilated in silence. Others suggest something more sinister. The that the regiment was captured en masse, interrogated, and executed in secrecy to conceal the scale of the failure. German officers at post-war trials denied knowledge, dismissing the event as Soviet propaganda, yet their dismissals carried the same rehearsed evasions often used when concealing atrocities. Survivor testimonies, though scarce, lend weight to the story. In the 1960s, a veteran named Mikhail Dronov, who claimed to have deserted the 91st before its disappearance, described receiving contradictory orders to march into the factory district under cover of night. He recalled endless snow, the distant thunder of artillery, and the sound of German voices echoing from unseen positions. By dawn, he said, the regiment was gone. He deserted shortly thereafter, hiding among civilians until Soviet victory. His account was dismissed at the time as unreliable, but in hindsight, it aligned with declassified intercepts. Dronov's recollection of the phantom orders matched precisely, with Abwehrfunkspiel techniques documented. Elsewhere on the Eastern Front, the ghostly fate of the 91st became an object of speculation even within Soviet military circles. Some officers quietly suggested that the regiment's disappearance had been covered up to avoid embarrassment. To admit that thousands of men had been misled and lost to deception would have been a blow to morale and to the reputation of Soviet command. Instead, the regiment was quietly written out of official histories, its existence acknowledged only in archived paperwork stamped unrecoverable. For decades, families received no answers. Only whispers circulated among veterans, who spoke of the battalion that marched into silence. Even the Germans left unsettling hints. A diary belonging to a German signals officer, recovered after the war, described listening to Soviet voices on compromised frequencies, obediently following our words into the abyss. The entry, dated January 24, 1943, does not name the unit, but the implication is unmistakable. This chilling confirmation of manipulation underscores the psychological warfare that paralleled the physical battles of Stalingrad. In the labyrinth of ruins, information itself became a weapon, capable of destroying units as surely as artillery. Today, the disappearance of the 91st Rifle Regiment remains unresolved. Archaeological surveys of the Stalingrad battlefields have uncovered countless mass graves, but none that correspond to the regiment's numbers. Historians continue to sift through Soviet and German archives, piecing together fragments of transmissions and memos, but the full truth remains hidden. Was the regiment annihilated in an ambush, their bodies obliterated by bombardment? Were they executed in secret, their corpses concealed in forgotten pits? Or were they, as some suggest, dispersed into smaller groups, lost to frost, hunger, and silence? None of these explanations fully account for the eerie absence of records, the strange gaps in reports, and the sense that something was deliberately erased. The Ghost Battalion has since become a symbol of Stalingrad's unrelenting brutality. It represents not just the loss of men, but the erasure of their existence from history. A reminder that war is not only fought with guns and tanks, but with lies, misinformation, and the silencing of truth. In the ruined city, where tens of thousands perished, the 91st Rifle Regiment stands apart, not for what they did, but for how they disappeared. Their story, stitched together from declassified files and fragments of memory, remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the Eastern Front. A battalion that marched into the night and never returned, leaving only whispers in archives and the chilling phrase repeated by veterans, "They became ghosts at Stalingrad." Chapter 4. The Pact Beneath the Black Forest. In the spring of 1945, as the Reich collapsed and the Red Army advanced relentlessly across Eastern Europe, Germany became a theatre not just of war, but of secret negotiations. Among the most unsettling of these hidden exchanges was what came to be known in OSS microfilms as Project Eclipse, a clandestine parley beneath the dense canopy of the Black Forest. While cities like Berlin and Dresden lay in ruins, in an abandoned hunting lodge near Triberg, American intelligence intermediaries and representatives of the SS are believed to have met in the shadows. What was discussed, according to partially declassified reports and Soviet intercepts, was not surrender, but the transfer of entire intelligence networks, dossiers on defectors, and scientific blueprints. It was a transaction in which Nazi officers bartered secrets for survival, and Allied representatives weighed the price of compromising with the very enemy they were sworn to destroy. The meeting was allegedly convened in late April 1945, days before Hitler's suicide. The lodge, a secluded timber structure hidden among the pines, had been requisitioned by the 2nd SS Panzer Division earlier in the war. By then, it served as a discreet waypoint for couriers carrying sensitive material. OSS documents retrieved in 1946 refer cryptically to Black Forest acquisition files, detailing the capture of technical, schematics and personnel lists far too comprehensive to have been gathered solely through battlefield seizures. Among them were reports on Soviet partisans, decrypted communications from the Balkans, and early designs for jet propulsion improvements linked to Messerschmitt research facilities. These materials, intelligence historians argue, could only have come through direct collaboration with SS handlers, who in turn sought safe passage and immunity in exchange. The personalities involved remain shrouded. Some files reference SS Brigadeführer Walter Schellenberg, Himmler's intelligence chief, as a potential intermediary. Others point to American officers linked to Alan Dulles, then head of the OSS office in Bern, Switzerland, who had already initiated back-channel talks with German officials through Operation Sunrise. Whether these men personally attended the Black Forest meeting is unclear, but their fingerprints linger in the fragments of correspondence and coded OSS memoranda. Soviet decrypts intercepted by NKVD listening posts in Prague noted unusual radio traffic between Triberg and Zurich on the night of April 22, 1945. The transmissions, laced with coded references to Eclipse, carried phrases such as transfer guaranteed and custody assured, suggesting arrangements for the protection of German personnel. What the Germans offered was chilling in scope. Gestapo files, smuggled into the meeting under armed guard, contained dossiers on anti-Soviet resistance groups in Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltic states. These documents detailed not only their organizational structures, but also the identities of key leaders, effectively condemning them should they fall into Soviet hands. The Americans, desperate to prepare for the post-war struggle against communism, saw immense value in this intelligence. Likewise, files on Soviet defectors, spies, scientists, and political dissidents were offered as bargaining chips, a currency of survival. In return, the SS demanded safe passage, new identities, and assurances that certain individuals would not be handed over for trial. The setting itself heightened the sense of betrayal. Witnesses described the lodge as dimly lit, its windows shuttered, with maps spread across oak tables and briefcases filled with documents stacked in corners. Outside, the Black Forest loomed like a wall of shadows, muffling the world beyond. Guards from the 2nd SS Panzer Division reportedly kept watch on the forest roads, ensuring that the parley remained undisturbed. Inside, the language was precise, transactional, stripped of ideology. The Reich was finished, but its secrets were not. The SS representatives, dressed in civilian overcoats to avoid identification, spoke in measured tones of continuity and future alignment. Their American counterparts, likewise cautious, took notes in coded shorthand, ensuring deniability if the operation was exposed. When Stalin learned fragments of the truth, his rage was immediate. Decrypted Enigma traffic forwarded to Moscow suggested that Western allies were making deals with former enemies, cutting the Soviets out of the spoils of German intelligence. His response was brutal. NKVD units launched purges across Eastern Europe, rounding up suspected collaborators and executing resistance leaders accused of Western ties. Stalin's fury transformed the fragile post-war alliance into open suspicion, accelerating the division of Europe. The seeds of the Cold War, some historians argue, were sown not in Yalta or Potsdam, but in the shadows of the Black Forest, where secrets changed hands beneath flickering lanterns. The lodge itself did not survive history intact. After the war, locals reported seeing American trucks removing crates from the site, their contents never recorded in official inventories. Weeks later, the building was burned to its foundations under unclear circumstances, leaving only stone chimneys jutting from the forest floor. Today, moss covers the ruins, and hikers pass unaware of the role it once played in shaping post-war geopolitics. But among the declassified OSS reels, fragments of Soviet reports, and whispered testimonies of those who survived, the story of Project Eclipse persists. It is the story of a pact not signed on paper but sealed in silence, a transaction that blurred the line between victory and compromise. What makes the Black Forest parley so haunting is not just its betrayal of principle, but its effectiveness. Many of the individuals believed to have participated disappeared from history, their names absent from war crime trials, their records conveniently lost. Some resurfaced in the 1950s and 1960s under new identities, working quietly within Western intelligence services or scientific institutions. Their survival was not a coincidence. It was the price paid for secrets deemed too valuable to ignore. Meanwhile, those they betrayed, the resistance fighters, the defectors, the partisans, were left to face the full wrath of Stalin's security apparatus. The story of the Pact beneath the Black Forest is a reminder that war does not end cleanly. Victory on the battlefield can mask deals struck in shadow, where truth is traded like contraband, and enemies become partners overnight. It is a chapter written not in triumph but in compromise, its pages scattered across archives and sealed dossiers, and it leaves behind a question that continues to haunt. How many of the post-war world's foundations were built not on justice, but on bargains made in the dark woods of a collapsing Reich? In the aftermath of uncovering these 4 classified accounts, one cannot escape the weight of what has been revealed. Each file, once buried under decades of redaction and silence, carries with it the unmistakable signature of decisions made in shadows. Decisions that shaped not only the course of the Second World War, but the fragile peace that followed. The forgotten convoy scattered to its death in the Arctic wastes, abandoned by an order rooted in fear rather than certainty. The blood-soaked cellars of Warsaw, where human bodies were harvested and discarded in the name of medical necessity, twisted into horror. The ghost battalion of Stalingrad, swallowed by deception and erased from the record, its soldiers condemned to vanish without graves or remembrance. And the Pact beneath the Black Forest, where victors and criminals met in secrecy, bartering human lives and entire futures for intelligence, setting the stage for a Cold War built on mistrust. These stories do not exist in monuments, parades, or official histories. They survive in fragments, in whispers, in documents once stamped top secret and hidden in vaults. And perhaps that is why they still unsettle us, because they force us to confront the possibility that the darkest truths of war are the ones most carefully concealed. How many more files remain sealed, gathering dust in forgotten archives? How many more ghosts lie waiting to be named? The silence of the Arctic, the cellars of Warsaw, the ruins of Stalingrad, and the forests of Germany still hold their secrets. The question that lingers is not whether more will be found, but whether the world is ready to face them when they are.